That was the sign we had, wasn't it, on the screen? 3, 2, 1.
Oh, man. It's lovely to have you back, Julia.
Oh, Cinder, it's great to see you.
Yeah. Time flies, doesn't it? It feels like it was just yesterday we were chatting, and before we know it, it's time for us to chat again.
I know. It's lovely that it's here, but you're absolutely right. Time has quite gone very, very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a hard time. This last month has been quite a hard time for me. And it's been really interesting because, all my aches and pains and everything, they're back. It's like when you go through these emotional kind of, you hit rock bottom, and your body also seems to sort of contribute to this whole mess, or rather crumble under it. And
Exactly.
I was thinking that, that is, I'd like to do, that's something that you and I have spoken about quite a bit, haven't we, Julia? Because we have our own kind of bodily chronic pain issues that we've been kind of carrying, and we understand it quite well. So it's a conversation we've been having, and there's a lot of that's applicable to dogs as well. Muscles are muscles at the end of the day. So I thought maybe the next live we can talk about that. How does that sound?
I think that's a great idea, because discomfort, pain, but put the chronic word in front of it, which ongoing. That's different, isn't it? And physiologically it's different, neurologically it's different, but it feels different too. And chronic pain and how it affects us, and alongside how it must affect our dogs, there's got to be parallel. Well, there is parallel.
Yeah. Okay. I think a lot of us. Sorry.
And chronic pain and how it.
That sounds like your voice, because I have your video on the phone here, just in case there are some comments to keep an eye out on. So yes, those of you who have joined us, I hope you can hear us. I hope you can see us. You can see Julia and me. If so, give me a thumbs up, or let me know if you can hear us clearly.
That was a very large hand, wasn't it?
Yes. All right. So today I thought we will talk about, I mean, there are so many topics for us to talk about, Julia. And I think one of the things that both you and I have been talking about from different perspectives and different angles for quite a while is equipment, walking equipment, sort of the reason why it was interesting for me because, you came at it from a very different angle while Turid was already talking to me about it. And the similarity in what you were saying was so tremendous that I could not believe that you both had arrived at it independently. I just couldn't believe that you hadn't known of Turid for a lot longer than what I anticipated. So that was really interesting for me. And you bring in, you're more concerned about muscles and movement, aren't you?
Yeah, very much. Well, it's the whole anatomy, really, because obviously if you affect one part of the anatomy, it's going to affect the whole dog. So yes, we look at everything from a whole body perspective, whether it's equipment, activity, or exercise, or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this whole body perspective and how they tie in together. But I wanted to start out by reading a little part of the book which talks about this topic. There's a fairly long essay on it that starts on page 31 and goes on to quite a few pages. So I'm not going to bore everybody by reading the whole essay. I'm going to read parts of it because I think they're interesting for us to talk about. But of course, those of you who have read the book, if you've had specific questions about specific parts of this, we can definitely dive into that either today or do another live, depending on how deep you want us to dive.
Yeah.
So page 31, the book Dog Nose, for those of you who may be following, the essay titled Walking Equipment. Fastening restraining equipment around animals' necks is a very ancient idea. However, the impact of this practice on the animal had not been sufficiently studied until recently. Today, there is enough evidence to suggest that the use of restraints around the neck has severe short and long term implications. I have listed several of those studies in the reference section on our website, but we should not really need studies to tell us what common sense can. If you think about it, the neck is the most vulnerable part of the vertebrate's body. It has some very important functions, and yet, unlike the heart or the brain, it is not encased in a bony cover. Animals exploit this exact vulnerability when hunting and going for the kill. It's almost always the neck. Without having to read the rest of this essay, you surely know the only way to strangle someone to death is to go for the neck. What makes the neck so vulnerable? Let's examine the anatomy of a mammal's neck and understand this better. I invite you to start the rest of it. I will not read for now. Jump straight down to the muscles section. But before I do, Julia, any thoughts on this?
Well, on the neck, the neck, all movement begins and ends with the neck, quite frankly. We need our neck for every type of action that we make. We're not always aware of it, but we do. When we have a compromised neck, my goodness, we know how painful that is. But the neck also encompasses everything that comes from the head, from the brain to the rest of the body. I mean, it's as simple as that, or from the heart to the brain. But everything neurological really comes from here or goes back there. So it's our total relay system. So it's something that has to go through here. So it's a very vulnerable area. So we've got massive blood vessels. We've got a whole highway of neurology going backwards and forwards through the neck. It's a constant feedback and supply chain.
Yeah.
And yet we are putting something that either becomes tight on one area or restricts throughout the whole area on there. And I believe many years ago it was thought to be because it was the strongest part of the dog. But actually, yeah, it is strong. It's got to support the head and everything else, but it's so vulnerable. So we've got to treat their necks with the same amount of vulnerability as we would want our necks to be treated. I mean, if I have a button to do up on a shirt, the last thing I want it to be too tight here. I mean, that is it's so counterintuitive to have something tight here because, as you say, it's our area of vulnerability. So it has air, it has blood, it has everything going through, or oxygen, I should say, through this area. Yeah. So anatomically, we have to be aware of that as a whole, not just one part, but the whole of it.
Yeah.
But also, just going on from there, dogs are different to other people anatomically, and also to horses and to people, is that they don't have a ligament connection between their last vertebrae and their skull. So it gives them major amount or much more mobility within the skull to the first vertebrae. So there is that vulnerability too. Sorry, Sindel, carry on.
Right. So let's get a little bit deeper into the conversation on the muscles. So I'm going to read a little bit from the essay again, page 35. Surrounding the vertebra in the neck are several muscles connecting the head to the chest, shoulders, and legs. Despite being strong, these muscles are not immune to mechanical damage. As found in a study conducted in 1992 by Anders Hallgren, I think there are newer studies actually that, since the publishing of the book, if I'm not mistaken, 2019 or 2020, there was another study done which kind of measured the amount of pressure on coming from different angles with different equipment. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely not the latest one. The clearest correlation in the study was between neck damages and jerk pull. 91% of the dogs who had neck injuries had also experienced jerking of the leash. Mechanical pressure on the belly of these muscles can not only damage the fine muscle fiber in it, but also have a cascading effect on all the other parts of the neck and the parts of the muscles, parts that these muscles are connecting to, including the head and the legs. This can lead to referred pain and later in tingling sensation in the paws, which might also lead to dogs licking their paws. Julia explains this cascading effect thus. Damaged muscle fibers shorten during their self healing mechanism. The shortening of the muscle length surrounding the vertebra will draw these vertebrae of the neck closer together, in turn compromising the gap between each of the vertebral bodies, thereby impinging on the structures. This can have a devastating effect on the major nerves and vessels supported through and around these vital vertebrae, with the high potential of severe dysfunction, pain, and referred pain. Manifestations include deep physical and psychological effects. Anyone who suffers from headaches from a bad neck will know how this feels. I think this is kind of, back to the same thing that you were talking about. So, could you talk to us a little bit, Julia, about this idea of impinging of the nerves? How does that happen? Why should that be happening? And a lot of people do say that a dog's, and like you admitted it yourself, a dog's neck has extremely strong muscles and therefore it cannot be damaged by a collar. Would you agree?
Well, muscles by very definition are soft. They are soft tissue. So anything that is going to create an ongoing pressure within soft sliding structures, that's how muscles work. They are sliding filaments. So they are highly dynamic within themselves, is going to have, they're going to damage them. They're soft cells. So the neck, yes, it does have strong muscles because it needs strong muscles to, as I said, hold the head, but also to maintain movement through the body. So these muscles, if they're compromised in the neck, they have not just a major effect on the neck and the head and the forelimb, which makes sense because they are connected, but they actually have fascial connections all the way through the dog's body. So if you have a compromised neck through damaged muscles, you are going to see that through damaged chains of movement through the whole body. So it may not be particularly obvious, but that is going to be an ongoing effect. But muscles and the neurological system, I mean, you can't separate these things. I mean, obviously, nerves stimulate muscles and provide action potential so muscles contract and also allow that relaxation so they can move or allow movement. But as I said, it's more about when muscles are damaged, they scar, and the scarring process means that they become shorter, and therefore that if you've got a critical length between two joints, whatever that might be, whether it's a vertebral joint like a facet joint on the vertebrae or a joint between a limb, you are going to get a compression on one or both sides, which is going to create that smaller space that is anatomically required for that joint to move correctly. Have I explained that correctly? No, not correctly, but easily. Does that make sense? I know I've explained it correctly, but I hope it makes sense. So we are basically, by damaging or damaging any muscles, creating a change potentially in that anatomical length of that muscle, that particular muscle or those groups of muscles, which is going to have an effect on the joints and also their posture.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that muscles have a certain length at which when they perform at that length, it's optimal, not just from the muscle strength perspective, but the underlying bones and the underlying joints that they support. So it's not just about a fit muscle or a fat muscle or a toned muscle. It's really about what length they should be functioning at to facilitate the joint movement under it. And if they're
Yeah,
shorter than what they need to be, that's obviously, I mean, we can start picturing it already. This joint is going to start getting pulled in, and that
exactly.
will kind of create a tremendous load on that joint, which then what takes us down the path of things like arthritis, bone spurs.
Potentially, but it's a cycle. It's a
Yeah,
cycle. You have this change, then you create imbalance, and then imbalance creates an inflammation then creates discomfort creates guarding then creates compensation,
yeah,
that then creates more inflammation, and here we go.
yeah, yeah,
So it's a very, and the thing is, it can take a while for these effects,
yeah,
and often they can't be tracked back
yeah,
because they become so complex
yeah,
in their changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was going at, because um, it sounds all very sort of, oh my goodness, kind of this doomsday thing that, we're going to be going down this path, and a lot of it sadly is irreversible. So even if you do kind of um, develop an awareness of the fact that this is happening at a certain point of time, you can't undo it. You can only slow it down.
Yeah. You can
So
help manage it. You can help manage it with treatment. But yeah, once a muscle has been damaged, yes, there are other fibers that can be recruited to take over. But it's very like if you cut your skin, muscles repair in a very similar way to how skin. And you form then a scar. And if it's quite a deep scar, if it's a thin scar, the skin will still be quite movable. But if it's a deep, thick scar, that will be, you will have movement restrictions over that area, and it's exactly the same.
yeah. um and I think this is the kind of challenge as well, is the slow build up, or the slow kind of, not build up, the slow breakdown.
Yeah,
It's not easy to tie that back. It's not easy to kind of look at a scar tissue and understand how something as simple as a scar, uh,
mm,
on a muscle, can translate to this kind of gradual build up, where it's leading
yeah,
to lesser and lesser mobility, and eventually it starts impacting big things like quality of life and length of life and so on and
yeah,
so forth. And
mm,
so it's a very, very difficult conversation to have,
yeah,
both emotionally and kind of with evidence, and but at the same time, it's a conversation we cannot afford not to have.
exactly. And the
Um,
thing is, we may have mentioned it before. We've been doing this now at Garland 20 years, and we've seen this cycle so many times. And we are very good at managing it. But as you quite rightly say, you can't stop us. You can't get rid of a scar. A scar's a scar, but you can help by rebalancing and help prevent that ongoing compensatory effect. But the thing is, by using a collar, and not by having a collar loosely around their neck, but by using a collar to restrain ongoing, is going to have great potential for harm. And the thing is, we have to look at this in the round too, don't we? Because why do we put collars on dogs in the first place? It's to, let's say, keep them safe, because they can't walk around loose with us because we have traffic and goodness knows what. So we do have to keep our dogs safe, but we've got to keep them safe in the best way. So there are other mechanisms that we can use, but the best one of all is to have good training for walking nicely on the lead. When I say nicely, depends on where you are and how you're walking safely, I should say.
yeah. And it doesn't mean that you use a collar to teach your dog that.
No, no,
It's
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
because you don't want to be doing more damage in the process. And
No.
that's kind of what I talk about is, yes, we need safety equipment, but safety equipment cannot be something that causes anatomical damage.
Yeah,
That too,
exactly.
possibly irreversible, insidious ones.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
like muscles that we've spoken about. Right. So I don't want to really get into the details of all the other anatomical aspects of it because there's just so much happening in the neck. I think we can go on for a day and we will still
I was
not.
going to say, you know, I won't be quiet. So
Yeah.
I think that everyone doing this.
and I've done a whole series of this. I mean, on this on the BHARCS pages. So we have a bunch of videos where we talk about different things like lymph glands and blood vessels and nerves and so on
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
forth. So if any of you want more anatomical details, please go ahead and watch those videos. And if you have any specific questions, I'll be glad to take them or get Julia on board to try and see if she can answer it. Not if she can, she can. She definitely can.
Thank you.
um, so let's skip topics a little bit and not too far away. I wanted to discuss a little bit more on the different kinds of harnesses. So let's assume that we've kind of managed to convince somebody that move to a harness, and obviously the next question always is what kind of harness.
Yeah.
um, and so again, going back to my essay, page 37, I do list a bunch of pointers. I'm going to read those pointers, and Julia, maybe we can discuss those. Um, so point number 1, dogs require a full range of movement in various joints and limbs. In chapter 8, I have included an essay on the front leg that explains how the front leg of a dog of dogs are actually floating limbs with the shoulder blade gliding over the rib cage. A harness that has straps that pass over the shoulders of a dog can restrict this gliding movement and result in improper loading of the joints, which can lead to long-term muscle and joint pain. A good harness, therefore, will steer clear of the shoulder blade. All right,
Absolutely.
thoughts, Julia. I think we keep coming back to this whole idea of long-term muscle and joint pain.
Yeah.
Why should restricted movement cause joint pain?
Well, again, what you say about harnesses, there are harnesses. There are some very good harnesses, but there also can be harnesses that aren't so great for the dog's body at all. And you mentioned a very good point. The forelimb of the dog doesn't have what we have. We have a clavicle here, which is a bone, a collarbone. Now we need that because we have a massive range of movement and we lift things with basically our front. We hold them above. We need that stability. The dog doesn't need that. In fact, they need that wonderful mobility in their forelimbs to be able to run and course and change direction. So absolutely, as you say, it's basically the front legs are held on by soft tissue and muscle. So there are no bony attachments. And these areas of soft tissue and muscle, they need to be able to go through their full range of movement. They need to be able to move to, as I say, their full range. Now, if you're putting, I'm trying to put it, it's here, it would be here where this shoulder would be. Oh, thank you. Yeah, because we're flat anatomically. If you put it here, then it's a bit like wearing a strap around here. You wouldn't be able to move your arms, and arm movement when we are walking is incredibly important to connect the whole body. And we're not even putting any load through our arms.
Right.
So if we're restricting the dog's arms, it is restricting their range of movement. And the moment you restrict their range of movement, you put an impact through the whole body. Again, muscles build up, but then because they can only go so far, then they become incredibly strong and tight within a certain range. And then the moment the dog goes beyond that range, they can then have damage. So you are doing a couple of things here. By restricting the shoulder movement, you're anatomically restricting them, but you're also building their muscles within that area and the neck completely correctly. But also, it must be uncomfortable to have that restriction. It's like wearing clothes that are just too small for you, that just don't allow that movement.
Yeah. I love that. That's, kind of where you come to, which is to say, look, I can talk about the anatomy of it, but at the end of the day, come on. I mean, how does this feel?
Yeah,
A pair of shoes that are a little too tight for you.
yeah, yeah.
How does that feel? Do you
That
really?
nagging
Yeah,
feeling of just, and then we wonder why our dogs might get a little bit grumpy, or
ex-
short-tempered or impatient or whatever it might be. But if you've got this nag that's just uncomfortable, oh, it'd be so annoying. Yeah,
and if you are already in pain because you've been having this restricted movement and your joints have started overloading, if you're
yeah,
already in chronic pain, this additional nag could really kind of just set the dog off. It looks like
exactly.
it's coming out of completely nowhere, but it isn't. It's really the dog that has had it up to here and then some more.
Exactly, exactly. But anything across here, I mean, that brings me to another point of any type of harness, even the best harnesses, you have to fit it correctly. And one thing that really upset me a lot is when people buy a harness and they are, I mean, no one goes out to buy wrong equipment, do they? No one. They go out, well, I would say 99.9% of people do not go to buy bad equipment. Everyone goes out to either equipment that they have always had, so haven't questioned it, or to try and get something that's better, which is fantastic. But if they're not given the right information, then they might make slightly the wrong choices. So some harnesses, when you fit them, a harness should fit here over the sternum of the dog, the knobbly bit that sticks out. If you press here, everyone, this is what I get people to do do you remember the old days when we used to see people in seminars and things? Do you remember that, Sindor?
I
Seems
was
like a very long time ago now. But, but what I used to do, so people can just feel this, because I'm all about the empathy. And I think if people can feel what it feels like, then you understand what we're talking about. As you say, we can talk about anatomy, but it's all about feeling. So if you press on those bones really hard, okay, it's not comfortable, but it's sort of okay. So that's you being pulled back by a harness that fits you correctly. Now just go up a centimetre over that bone and now press in there. Yeah, that's a very different feel, because that is going straight in pipe. And so often we buy harnesses at a nice Y configuration, but when it's never tested when you're actually restraining your dog. So just restrain them slightly and see where that connection fits. It should sit there, because if it slides up, which so many do, you are actually almost asserting more pressure there than potentially a collar,
Yeah.
because it's going in that direction into their throat. So make sure it sits on the sternum when there's a bit of resistance.
Yeah. So that's, I think, point 4 on this essay, which I might as well read out at this point. So it says, a good harness should not ride up high on the neck, since that pinch on the neck, that can pinch on the neck like collars do. The whole point of using a harness is to shift the load down towards the sternum, that thing, which
Yeah.
cannot be achieved by a harness that rides high on the neck.
Do you know what? This is still hurting. This
Yeah.
is actually had quite an effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, empathy.
Yeah. So yes, we have little Maya here, this one's not very anatomically sound herself.
Not really, but it's better than looking at it on me. That's completely wrong. But
But
of
I
course,
think this is
yeah,
the
that's
talking
what
about
we're talking
it,
about.
that
Yeah.
part has to kind of sit low as
So,
we can get to
Sindor,
anyway.
if you want to pick that little dog up again, and then just if you pull on the ring where the leash goes, you can
Yeah.
actually, it doesn't actually move, but that that's what it gets pulled up once there's resistant leash attachment there.
Yeah. Don't count on this doggy giving you more predictable dynamics.
No, it's good to have it. Good to have it. Yeah.
All right. So the next point I make here is some harnesses tend to pinch under the armpits, which can cause chafing and irritation. It is better for a harness to move its straps further back down the rib cage, leaving the front limbs completely free.
Yeah.
So basically, that space that we're talking about. What's the problem with the pinching under the armpits? Other than it's pinching under the armpits, like it just feels wrong. Other than that, is there an anatomical consideration for this?
Yeah.
Or a
Loads.
movement consideration?
Yeah. Well, one thing under here for a dog, first of all you need to do is do that a little bit. And I've got clothes on, but that would really, as you said, beyond irritate. There are many moving parts under here. There's a muscle called the Latissimus Dorsi. Now that goes from under the arm all the way up to the pelvis. So that is a conduit between the front and the back end. And that draws the leg back and allows the leg to go forwards when moving. And that, being such a big muscle, there's a lot of movement on that. That is where exactly that would sit, at that insertion point. So that is not a good place. But under the arm, because it is meant to move, because we put on a lovely harness to allow that movement, we want to encourage that full range. But under the arm, deep under the arm, there is a neurological junction. It's huge. And that serves the arm, and it comes from the neck. We do not want to be anywhere near there. We want to be back over, as your little dog has demonstrated, well away from that area. So we need to make sure that the top line, the top strap from where it attaches between the scapulae and where it finishes is long enough. Exactly.
So this one's long enough. Also, this one is long enough so that it's able to move back.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about the lats, that's the one on the sides here. And if that starts kind of the harness starts impinging on the lats, on where the lats join, and the lats start shortening, you are going to see the dog. Well, what are we likely to see? Are we going to likely to see the dog kind of moving their sides? I know that Nishi's lats were shortened, and there was that adorable looking bum action, but it's really adorable. What kind of movement changes are we likely to see if the lats start shortening?
It would be very specific to what else is going on in the body, because it is such a conduit. But all I can say is, if anyone's had this side pain here going through because they've overstretched or something, it is just so painful. Well, it's that nagging. It's a bit like having a toothache in your back. But also, if you've got shortening over here, you basically, you are going to have ultimately lung sort of or diaphragm impingement, because your ribs are going to be too uncomfortable to really breathe properly. It's everything affects everything. So it would be difficult to say, but I would suggest anything around the lats, it would just be very, very irritating. And yes, the shortening, especially one side, can make a slight well, not even a slight, but asymmetry through the body. And then that could be corrected or compensated. Or when I say corrected, the body trying to correct it. So everything is going to have an effect. But I would suggest that is more just really irritating.
Yeah. So I have an additional point here, which I don't know how you feel about it, and it's specific to countries like India, where it gets so hot. We were talking about the upcoming summers. I'm just not looking forward to it. It gets so hot that, myotherapy sessions get very hard too. That's something that I've observed as dogs struggle with it. It's that really that hot. So there is an additional consideration that harnesses must be as light and minimally covering as possible, so not as to overheat the dogs. If you put your hand under the harness after a walk, it should not have heated up.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Julia?
Well, yes, I mean, I can't say it's a big problem for us over here. Not a big problem, but no, you really, it's a very good point. You don't want a mass covering. The strap size that you've got there on that little dog is good. The thing is, the thinner the straps, the better the fabric it's got to be. Because of course, if you're putting on thinner straps, it's going more or less surface area, so the pull is going to be greater. So you want to make sure that the fabric is soft and doesn't harden when it's wet or with overuse. So really check the fabric, because there are some that put like a fleece either side, which wouldn't be appropriate for you at all. But they quite often are very thin. It's between it. When you pull, it's that thin strap that pulls. So you've got the double whammy in India. You've got all the fleece for heat, but you haven't got the benefit of that dissipated load going through. So the harness I use and the one that you use is I'm sure we can say the name is a Haki harness. That type of harness they use, and they are very particular about the type of fabric they use or material they use. I still think we can improve some aspects. I don't think there's not going to be a perfect harness for every dog, but it's the way we fit them that's got to be that makes them as close to perfect as possible for our dog. But those are nice. They have quite long back straps. The fabric's good. They fit nicely over the sternum, as long as it's fitted to your dog. The thing about it also is that the little leash attachment is quite firmly attached, so it doesn't flap. So you've always got to be careful too about when you attach the leash that it's not a heavy buckle, because can you imagine that knocking on your back the whole time?
Yeah. So that is something I talk about as well. So up here, and so the clasp on the leash, that clasp here, you don't want it really heavy, and finding something that's light yet strong can be quite challenging. So somebody asks a question: can you please repeat the word that sounds like latch on the side of the dog?
Latissimus dorsi. Latissimus dorsi muscle, otherwise colloquially known as your lats. And they're the ones that when you're doing, they show here, but the dog, they're on their side.
Recommendation for harnesses. Like Julia said, we both have a Hakehana harness. That's what we both use. But of course, it's not that it doesn't have its issues. And I think, especially in the UK and some parts of Europe, I am seeing quite a bit of innovation around harnesses. Many small companies kind of coming up with trying to address different shortcomings, and they're all kind of going in the right direction. Well, some in the right, some in the wrong. But so I don't kind of want to do a product review or I don't want to specifically tie it down to one harness. I think, and that's what I encourage my students to do as well, is to say, listen, these are kind of the criteria that you need to keep in mind, and please go and figure out what is the right harness for you based on what
your dog. For your dog. Absolutely. The other thing to be aware of too, there are some dogs that you approach with a harness that maybe were fine, suddenly go, don't put it on. Be aware of that, because a lot of harnesses sit on the vertebrae, as does the Hakihana, as all of them. And if a dog has got a bad back, even touch over the vertebrae is going to be so uncomfortable, and they're going to resist it. So it's always like everything, just read your dog and believe them. They're not trying to con you. They're not trying to be difficult. There is always, in my mind, a reason for their behavior. Would you agree, Sindor?
Absolutely. I think that's it's almost kind of comical for me to believe that there won't be a valid reason driven by biological functions and neurological responses, and they're not, like you said, they're not here to con us. That's not
No, no,
yes.
no.
So there is a reason they're trying to tell us something, and I think the
Yeah.
more we try to kind of pay attention to try and understand, and like you said, believe them. I think that's
Mm.
probably an area where I've seen a lot of people make a mistake, particularly because they don't want to believe that their dog may be in pain. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
just easier to say, "Oh, you're just being a difficult dog," and it's easier in the short term, but not so in the long term.
Yeah,
And we can come to regret it. So the more we believe them, I think the more sense it makes.
exactly. I mean, I remember, again, empathy again, when I had a particularly bad neck and I had bulges in my neck, and the label in my shirt was painful. If it touched my skin, that's how sensitive it can be. So
Yeah.
again, I think if we have experienced any form of pain, chronic pain, acute pain, whatever, be empathetic and try and feel, well, how would might that feel for them?
Yeah.
Because they're the same. We're built the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so the last point I make in the essay is a little, okay, moving away a little bit from the kind of harnesses that we've been talking about to something that goes around the head, which some people also call the head harness.
Mhm.
So some harnesses restrict movement of the head and impose a certain head carriage. Unnatural head carriage causes muscular issues, as discussed in the essay on the floating limb in chapter 8. This type of harness can also cause neck injuries in dogs. I have seen some of the most awful whiplash injuries from these, says Julia. The leverage potential on the dog's head through the joint where the skull meets the neck vertebra is huge. The dog is anatomically really unprotected in this region. Can you unpack that for us, Julia? What are you saying?
Yeah, this is a few years ago now. I would like to think that there is better education about these. Now, head harnesses are for dogs that are particularly strong and are difficult to perhaps maintain control in certain situations. Now, again, let's go back to safety and when they may be appropriate. Anyone that is advised to use one of these must know how it works and the potential you have for that type of leverage. So again, as I said, it is about safety, but then if you are going to use anything like this, you have got to know what potential there is. Because, as I sort of pertained to earlier, the dog's head and neck with us and with a horse, and I always sort of pick up on the horse because I know a lot of people understand equine anatomy. You've got something called the nuchal ligament, and this is a very strong ligament that goes from the back of our skull through our neck to our thoracic vertebrae, which is basically where our ribs are. And it goes, and then it changes into a different ligament, but it's continuous all the way down the back. So it forms this strong ligament that helps maintain the integrity between the head and the neck and the rest of the vertebrae. Now, with the dog, it doesn't go to the head. It finishes or it starts at the first vertebrae. So it actually the second vertebrae, allows that head that mobility. So basically they can groom themselves, keep themselves clean and have that extra movement. But where there is more movement, there's more vulnerability. So if you do have something that grips behind the head, right behind the skull, there is not a lot of protection there. It is very, very soft tissue. And the leverage from a nose, if you are pulling on the nose, is you've got huge amount of strength if it's a sideways movement. So if you do use one, please make sure that your trainer shows you, your professional trainer, how to use it and when to use it correctly. As I said, it does come down to safety first. Ideally, we would all just be using well-fitting harnesses, but I know that some of us live in different situations and we need to have different solutions. But that has got to be a solution for specific situations.
And one needs to understand the cost of the solution. At what cost are you actually doing this?
Exactly.
Are you going in choosing to be blind? Are you going in underplaying what it can do? Or are you
Yeah.
justifying what it can do
Mm.
because of whatever reason? I mean, people take different decisions, but I think going in with awareness.
Yeah. You've got to make decisions with a backdrop of education, but proper education. Training may be one thing, but you've got to take and the anatomy and put it together.
Yeah. All right, Julia, I think that brings me to the end of this particular essay. There is a lot more in the essay, in the book. I don't remember if we got around to updating the resources section, which is supposed to be on our website. We're trying to. We're just a little slow with it because there's a lot of new information that we've kind of been running into. It's so hard to keep up, and I think it makes sense to kind of include those the new information and put out something that's really useful. So we will do that. We will get around to it. Meanwhile, the essay should give you the details of the anatomy, and if not, of course, Julia's foundation class gives you a bit of the anatomy as well, doesn't it, Julia?
Absolutely. But can I say, Sindor, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your book is lovely. It's a lovely read. I mean, it's educational, but it's also incredibly heartwarming as well. So if anyone hasn't read it, read it because it puts everything in context. And that's what's so good.
Yeah.
One of the things that's so good.
I think it's similar to what you mentioned. Just like in the body, everything is connected, and then further past that into the mind, it is. It sounds a little, what do you say, a little all over the place when we say body mind connect, but when you talk about the mind, which in terms of the chemical reactions, the electrical signals, and the way experiences are stored and the physiological responses to experiences, you can see that it's not really an imagined connection. There is something significant that needs to be taken into consideration, and so it's not enough to look at things in isolation. I think we've discussed kind of the nuances of different equipment, and it's one thing to look at equipment from just the perspective of, hey, this is used for a walk, and how do I get a good walk from the piece of equipment? That's the only question I'm going to ask, and then a whole other set of answers may emerge. But if you're looking at, this is the welfare of the individual that I care about, the walk is an experience that's meant to physically and mentally enrich this individual. It's part of their care. It's when you look at all of that, then you start asking a different set of questions. Is it enough to just get a good walk, or is it, it's important to make sure that it's pain free, that it's not restrictive, it's pleasurable, it gives the full range of movement. There's so many other questions that come into play that we don't always ask ourselves if we look at it from this kind of siloed perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it's not because people don't want to. It's just that there's so much tradition, isn't there? You get a dog, you put a collar and a lead, and now we're all questioning, and that's great. But we've got to question more and more and more, because it's like not one set of anything is perfect for every person. We're all individual, as are our dogs.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, tradition is a hard one to fight. No matter which aspect of life you're talking about, tradition is a hard one to fight.
It is. But I mean, again, I'll say it again, over the last 20 years, which is just a small amount of time, I have seen so many positive changes. So that, and things that were thought of when I mentioned certain things years ago, like jumping out of cars and things, people went, don't be ridiculous, that's stupid. Now are mainstream. So all these things, they do move on, and the more people that pick them up and actually go, do you know what, it makes a difference. And it doesn't just make a difference to my dog's life, it makes a difference to mine, because we are a happy unit, because we just go together, because everyone is happy, because neither of them are feeling agitated about anything or uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of takes the idea of connectedness past the individual into the social structure. That's kind of why in BHARCS we talk about biosociopsychology. It's all aspects of it: the social connections, the biological responses, the mental responses, or the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, all kind of and past learning experience of the humans, of the dogs. Everything comes into play when we're actually talking about creating harmony in the unit, and an individual cannot have extraordinary welfare when the unit isn't. So it really has to be sort of, your entire becoming only happens in context of what is around you. You don't be by yourself. That just doesn't happen.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay, I think we've had an interesting conversation this month. In the next one, we will maybe touch upon what we spoke about in terms of chronic pain, stress, and how it impacts it and behavior. That's an interesting one too.
Definitely.
All right. With that, I think, Julia, let's shall we let our audience go?
I think so. I think people over here might be wanting to go and get their lunch, but it's lovely. It's just great that people have joined us. And Sindor, well, we could chat for hours as always, but it's been a delight. Thank you for inviting me again to talk about this. I love chat. Love it.
Yeah. I always tell myself 30 minutes never happens.
Oh no, it's been quite a bit longer than 30 minutes, hasn't it? Time just flies. It really does. It really does.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I can see your messages of thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have specific questions that I might have missed, please send it in. We will try our best to answer it. I mean, that's why we're here, and this is kind of what brings us joy as well. And with that, let's everybody goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Sindor. See you soon.
All right. Let's see how to turn